what do we have here? You must be a new arrival. Let me guess, fate of the undead, right? Well, you're not the first, but there's no salvation here. You'd have done better to rot in the undead asylum. But too late now. Well, since you're here, let me help you out. There are, actually, 2 bells of awakening. One's up above in the undead church. The other is far, far below, in the ruins at the base of Blight Town. Ring them both, and something happens. Brilliant, right? Not much to go on, but I have a feeling that won't stop you. So, off you go. It is why you came, isn't it? To this accursed land of the undead?
I like to imagine everyone remembers their first experience with a Souls game. The first time they tried to play it, the first time they died, the first boss they beat, the first wall they hit that finally made them say, "Fuck this," and promptly yank the game out of their console and swear off the series completely. For me, it was when I was in middle school. I got Demon's Souls around Christmas of 2010 when all I knew about it was what a friend had excitedly told me. Killing monsters with magic spells, and every time you die the game gets harder. Considering how difficult the game allegedly was on top of that, already to my 13-year-old brain this sounded like a tall order. Still, I was really excited, and I put the game on my Christmas list, slapped it into my PS3, and to my absolute horror, was subjected to the most brutal game experience I ever had at that point. I had only beaten 2 bosses, barely, I might add, then started slamming my face into the Prison of Hope for about an hour before deciding that the game was bad, actually. I later traded Demon's Souls in, though I don't remember what for. I didn't really care what happened to the game, I just knew that maybe From Software wasn't for me. And if not for another fateful holiday in 2012, that's probably where this beginning story would end. But it didn't. I had heard murmurs of a game called Dark Souls and that it was a follow-up to the original Hellscape Nightmare I had played before, and I thought it right to stay away. Yet, something compelled me to try it. Maybe because it was easier? Dark Souls was going to be released on both PlayStation and Xbox, so clearly they wanted it to be more approachable, I thought. Worst case, I'd trade the game in again for something else. Fast forward to now, and the Dark Souls series is far and away my favorite series in modern AAA gaming. The first game is easily my favorite of all time. For reference, I love this series so much that I have not 1 but 2 tattoos dedicated to it on my back, and it was a game that I've replayed regularly. I didn't always love it, nor was I ever really any good at it until much later, but as I kept playing, making different builds, beating every boss multiple times, and going on just blasting through it even during college when the second game had already come out, I loved it more and more. I spent hours on hours watching every VaatiVidya upload to learn all of the lore and only dove further in love with this game. And even still, I feel myself all these years later wanting to come back to it. In all this time though, I never really stopped to ask myself why. I finished the games of upwards over a dozen times over the years, and even with all the improvements the other games make in the franchise, it's still the first one that has its grip on me. For the sake of this video, I'm playing this on the Dark Souls Remastered version. I'm doing this because it is the most accessible way to play this game, so if you've played the original version, like I have, some things might be different. So take some of what I say with a grain of salt, if you're a stickler for original hardware. In an interview with GameStop, as listed on the Dark Souls 1 wiki, director Hidetaka Miyazaki says, "We don't have to be bound by the features, the game design, and the content of Demon's Souls, so we were able to try out new things and take the experience from that game and put it into a brand new game." End quote. I think this is best exemplified in Dark Souls' world progression versus its predecessor. In Demon's Souls, you have the tutorial area, are met with a brutal boss that is supposed to kill you immediately, and then you're sent to the hub world, the Nexus. You then enter one of the levels, clear the first boss, and are free to explore the other locations at your disposal however you wish. It's simple if a bit formulaic, but it gets the job done. It's not a bad design. Games have been doing hub worlds to teleport elsewhere for years at this point. See early titles like Mario 64 and Banjo-Kazooie. What Demon's Souls lacks in this design, though, is world cohesion. Each area in Demon's Souls feels distinct from one another, but also wildly separated. The Tower of Latria feels very disconnected and detached from the mines. Boletaria is nothing like the Valley of Defilement. You get the picture. While this is a strength in that all the worlds feel distinct from one another, it leaves me feeling disconnected since the worlds are all so vastly different, you can't even tell how or if they are supposed to connect. You also have to return to the Nexus to go to any of them, so there's always a moment of respite and safety before you travel on. And I want to make it clear that this is not a bad thing. Demon's Souls is a game I have since replayed and loved, partially because of the look and feel of these zones. I just would enjoy it more if there was a clear, distinct way that these worlds all connected together. In Dark Souls, you start in the tutorial area, are introduced to the mechanics, which I will touch more upon in a moment, are instructed to run away from the first boss fight, get your equipment, beat the boss, are plopped down into the world, and you're free to explore. No portals, no hub world, you're just set and go. This, for world design, is my favorite thing that the game does. If there's a location you can see in the background, chances are very high you can go there, and in a lot of cases, you are going to go there. Not only that, but nearly every single area you can go to blends seamlessly into one another. One moment you're running around a city filled with the undead, and the next you're in a forest as a tree tries to see how you like getting cut down for a change. One moment you're delving deep into the sewers, and then boom, suddenly you're ankle deep in swamp water with some giants throwing boulders at you for looking at them funny. Then another goes by, and you either descend a path into what I imagine hell looks like, or you can ride an elevator up to a canyon that is filled to the brim with lightning-breathing drakes and a zombified dragon. In Dark Souls, you're free to start down any path and explore it as fully as you want, because as soon as you think you're done, you take a look around and realize that not only are you not where you started, but in an entirely new area with new enemies, environments, and new sounds. Which, can I just take a moment to mention that I absolutely love the sound design in this game? The game makes the smart decision of having no music for a majority of the time. In its absence, instead, Dark Souls loads everything up with ambient sound to better immerse you into the environment. Everything from the sound your character makes as you're walking on grass or stone, to even what kind of armor you're wearing. Even some of just the white noise is different from one another. The Undead Burg pumps your ears full of this cold ambience that sells you're in a decrepit city. While Darkroot Forest has the sound of insects chirping and humming in the background as well. But my favorite sound by far is this one. The death sound effect. That satisfying crunch as you fell an enemy, no matter the size or type, is a neat little touch that very clearly indicates to the player, hey, the fight is over now. But there's another very clever use to this sound. When you're exploring the Undead Asylum, you'll eventually meet a knight named Oscar who is at death's door. Now, you can kill him and immediately get the items he normally gives you, but if you talk to him instead, he'll plead with you to carry out his quest and then give you the key to progress and the Estus Flask, one of the only healing items in the game. If you stay in this room, he stays alive, but when you leave, you hear the death sound effect. And your soul count goes up. It's really haunting in a kind of way, doubly so when you consider that Oscar is the one who frees you at the beginning cutscene of the game. You're told mechanically that the first character you meet, probably the only kind character you'll meet in the game, is dead, but there's no time to dwell on it, you have to get out of here. Admittedly, yes, I'm probably reading far too deep into something that more than likely means nothing, but I can't help it. I love this game. This is just what it does to me. Okay, it is about 6 months later since my last recording. Life has been crazy, sorry. I'm at my parents' place right now, so portions of this recording are probably not going to sound the best. I'm sorry in advance. Mechanically speaking, Dark Souls is still one of the most satisfying experiences I have ever played. Everything about it feels very deliberate, from attack windups, enemy attack pattern, and stamina costs, to the bonfires, trap placement, and NPC locations. In a Q&A before Dark Souls' announcement, Miyazaki says, quote, "Generally, for Dark Souls, learning commands and controlling your character is probably a little bit easier, but to counter that, we've added a lot of aspects that users must learn beyond the controls. The amount of magic, the number of weapons, the types of weapons, the number of moves attached to those weapons. There's a lot more that a player must learn in order to overcome challenges," end quote. The best way to show this is by taking a very close look at the combat in Dark Souls. Lately, it's been the subject of some memes, usually in the style of text reading, "Dark Souls combat be like," and then footage of people somersaulting around someone, blindly swinging at them, unable to be hit. I enjoy these memes a lot, actually, but I'd be lying if I said that they kinda miss the point of how the game works. From the outside looking in, yes, you do roll a hefty amount in Dark Souls, but let's take a closer look under the hood. Unlike a lot of other action games, like say Bayonetta or Devil May Cry, once you decide to attack in Dark Souls, you are committed completely. You hit the light attack button, and you aren't doing anything else until that attack is over. Not only that, but look at how slow a light attack is. Action games like the earlier mentioned Bayonetta would let you input a dodge to cancel an attack so that you can get to safety if you catch it quick enough. Dark Souls though? No, you're seeing that action through to the end. It sounds like it'd be very frustrating, and I will admit I was annoyed with this combat system when I first played the game, but now I'm old enough to approach it at its level and have learned why this was such a good idea. Everything in Dark Souls can kill you in just a few hits, even just a standard cannon fodder enemy if you're not careful. This means you have to be deliberate and purposeful when you choose to attack. It becomes a tense back and forth of picking and choosing when to strike, because it's good to put pressure on your enemy, but what if you leave yourself open? What if you run out of stamina and have to block? But if you do, you'll get staggered and be even more vulnerable. This decision making is the core combat loop of Dark Souls, and it makes every encounter you have incredibly engaging. There's a kind of tension in knowing that one wrong move can mean dying and having to go back to a bonfire and losing all of your progress and souls. It's almost like playing a fighting game like Street Fighter or Mortal Kombat in a weird sort of way, though not nearly as complex as those games are at a high level. You have to pick and choose your moments to move in and attack, to take advantage of every opening your opponent gives you, and the game slowly ramps it up more and more as you go. In the Undead Asylum, the tutorial, you start by fighting one enemy at a time, and then just before the boss fight, you suddenly have to fight 2 melee fighters and an archer. In just a few moments, Dark Souls gives the player time to build up to the idea that risk management is a key factor here. As Miyazaki alluded to in that quote earlier, that isn't the only aspect of combat either. Weapons all handled differently from one another as well. From daggers to katanas to greatswords, every weapon has its own behavior and moveset that makes them very different from each other. Mostly, anyway. What I mean is the different weapon classes have different movesets from one another, but individual weapons tend to behave pretty similarly. Each katana generally behaves the same, like the washing pole versus the uchi katana, just like every curved sword is the same, like the falchion and the scimitar. Mechanically, I like this, for the most part. Each weapon does feel unique from one another. There's even some individual weapons that have unique attacks that other weapons don't, even similar types. But it is a bit of a letdown that not every weapon has its own unique moves. That, however, would be a massive ask, and the game still feels great as is. I mentioned it earlier, but there's only one way to heal in Dark Souls, the Estus Flask. Well, only isn't necessarily true. Let me explain. If you want to heal, you push a button and take a nice drink of Sunny D. It heals you a decent amount, and it's pretty fast, but you also are very vulnerable. Much like when you attack, if you use an item, you have to finish the action before doing anything else, and the item animations are long. Healing in Dark Souls is much riskier than fighting because of how open it leaves you. Naturally, this encourages the player to take greater risks during combat. After all, why try to heal in the middle of a fight when you can just end it here? Normally, you can only use 5 charges of the flask, but there is a way to earn more, which leads us to the next central mechanic, humanity. During the gameplay footage, you may have noticed this little number going up and down in the left corner of the screen. That's humanity. There's a handful of ways to get it, although one of them is wildly confusing. One way is there are certain items, also called humanity, that raises your points by 1 when you use them, or 2 in the case of twin humanity. This also heals you a very high amount, but also takes a bit longer than just using the Estus flask. When you die, you lose all of your humanity. The second way, I don't fully understand. Occasionally while killing enemies, the count will go up. I tried to read more on what causes this, and all I could really find was what various people on Reddit and GameFAQs said. If you kill 20 enemies in a row and you haven't beaten the area boss yet, you will earn a point of humanity. The number goes up by 1 every time, so you have to invest more kills into earning more humanity. I'm not totally sure how accurate this is, but it seems like it's backed up enough by players that it's accepted. To be totally sure, this would probably require a test of some kind, but I don't want to. Now you might be wondering, okay, so what exactly do you do with this? Humanity has a number of uses. Primarily, it enables you to reverse your hollowed state, indicated by the number turning white and your character no longer looking like a raisin. But also, if you're resting at a bonfire, you can spend a point to kindle the fire, which lets you hold 5 additional charges of your Estus flask. Later on in the game, you can kindle even further to where you can hold up to 20 charges. But there's another huge part of humanity. It's what enables some of the online features. In your human state, Dark Souls enables co-op and PvP at nearly all times. While walking around, you may notice some white letters on the ground. Walk up to them, you'll see a ghostly image of another character. Interact with it, and you can summon them to help you fight. Now, I'm playing the game primarily in offline mode, but the game still gives NPC spirits for you to summon, usually just outside of boss rooms. There have been a lot of instances, though, where having a spirit really saved me. I was fighting Quelaag and had Man-Eater Mildred helping. For this playthrough, I'm doing a lightweight dex build. And any attack the boss did could pretty much kill me in 2 hits. But Mildred, she's got my back. She does good damage and was able to help keep the aggro off of me. But while you're human, you're open to being invaded as well. Another player, or a programmed AI invader if you're offline, can come into your world and try to fight you. If you win, you get all of the souls they were carrying and a point of humanity, but if you lose, they get all of that as well. In the case of the AI invaders, you also get an item that only they carry. Now, if you want to avoid these invaders, you can play the game hollow. Nothing can invade you, but you also won't be able to summon help. And if you're playing primarily in offline mode like I am, those AI invaders tend to be pretty close to the boss rooms. I would still recommend playing most of the game in human form, as sometimes the enemy AI just isn't very good, seen here by Kirk just rolling over and over as I slash him to ribbons. There's 2 other parts of the multiplayer that I absolutely love. If you're playing in online, occasionally you'll find blocks of orange text on the floor. Players can leave messages for you across their games to let you know what may be coming up or if they overcame a boss. Or maybe they're the millionth person in Guinevere's chamber leaving big chest ahead. What I believe the intent here to be was that players could leave messages for each other as a sign of what's ahead or try to show other people if there's treasure. I say intent because I'm relatively sure the devs didn't want us to be meme-loving clowns with these messages. But a lot of the notes tend to be very helpful. It took me until about my 4th playthrough of the game before I found this bonfire in Darkroot Forest behind an illusory wall, and I was only able to find it because of a message left here on one of the days that I was replaying. In a sense, Dark Souls' indirect means of communicating with each other is meant to help build a community that helps each other through challenges or makes it easier for the next person to come through. And this is something that exists even in Elden Ring today. My favorite multiplayer mechanic, though, is seeing other players' spirits as you go about the game. Occasionally, while you're running around, you can catch glimpses of other people in real time going about the same section of the world as you. You can see them explore, fight, even die. You can't collect anything from them or interact with them beyond just being seen, but you can all see each other. You can even see them if you choose to rest at a bonfire. There's something really comforting about sitting at a fire after going through an intense fight and struggle, barely making it through, and seeing someone else sit there beside you as well because they did it too. The spirit mechanic is a constant reminder that you aren't alone in this. The game is difficult, and you might not always be moving forward, but at least you aren't the only one experiencing it. What strikes me about this, though, is that this is a carryover from Demon's Souls. In their review of Demon's Souls from Destructoid, critic James Stephanie Sterling says, quote, "I don't like feeling punished for trying to enjoy a video game, and I don't like games that force me to replay vast tracts of old ground each time I die." Demon's Souls, however, has a certain magic to it, some brilliant magnetism that keeps drawing one back into this dark and devastating world. Part of it is the fact that the methodical combat is intensely satisfying and brutal. Part of it is the fact that Demon's Souls' universe is incredible and fascinating. Most of all, however, I believe it's the fact that Demon's Souls constantly reminds you that you're not just one person going up against this cruel, spiteful game. You're one person of many, and you're all in this together, end quote. I'm inclined to agree with them here because, as I mentioned earlier, this is the exact way I feel about Dark Souls. The game is hell, and it will have so much fun letting you know it, but damn if it isn't comforting knowing that I'm not the only one going through it. Somehow the knowledge makes it all more doable. And the fact that the creative team had the insight to do this in the predecessor is just a stroke of brilliance on their part. I feel this community aspect has led to a bit of a controversial divide in the online gaming space. Dark Souls is an aggressively vague and cryptic game. Things are not told directly to you. Sometimes you just have to try random shit and see what works. A lot of people really despise this, and I can understand why. It's frustrating when you learn that a very helpful item that lets you navigate an area like Blighttown much easier isn't directly told to you, or even hinted at. However, I don't think it's fair to call this bad design. Is it player hostile? A bit. But I think what makes me hand-wave it a little is the community aspect of the game. Is it cumbersome to have to look up an item location on the wiki just because there's no obvious answer? Sometimes. But isn't guiding you to these items and secrets something the community was already doing anyway with the message mechanic? The answer is still sometimes. I'll be the first to admit the messaging system is not perfect. There's always a large number of joke messages where people just say treasure here right next to a cliff. But a lot of the time they are helpful and can lead you to items you wouldn't normally find on your own. In a way, what makes looking items up on a wiki much less detrimental to the experience, for me, is that it's something that clearly the messages were trying to do in the first place. All of this is to say, while I don't think it's a bad design choice to do secrets this way, I think a little more could have been done to point players in the direction of them, especially for those of us that want to play Dark Souls as a solitary experience. And if relying on looking things up or reading messages on the floor isn't your bag, then hey, I understand. I've mentioned Souls a handful of times now that I think now is the best time to bring them up. Across pretty much every Souls game, and even other titles like Elden Ring and Bloodborne, Souls act as a kind of double currency. On one hand, they allow you to level up and boost your stats so that you don't immediately die when fighting anything, but you also have to use them to purchase any weapons or equipment you want. Much like your stamina bar and Estus flask, Souls are a resource you manage for quite a while until you get your build figured out. I like this concept in theory. It's good in that it can be fun to have to make this decision early on of, oh man, this weapon on sale is really strong, I should get this, but wait, I could use these souls to boost my health and take a bit more damage. The problem I have, though, is that it feels like Dark Souls' leveling cost scales way too sharply. You pretty much do all of your leveling right at the start, and then from then onwards, if you want to level up any stats at all, you can maybe do 3 at a time if you have enough souls. What's nice is you can level up very quickly early on if you know how to invest. But if you're doing this for the first time and want to use one of the bigger weapons you get from beating a boss or one of the many Black Knights, you're going to be grinding for hours just to even two-hand some of these weapons. A word of advice if you want to play this game and get a weapon you like. Only boost your physical stats to about as high as you need them to be to one-hand it, if that. After, entirely boost vitality and endurance. The damage scaling has a cap that you hit pretty early on when you level enough for either strength or dexterity, but the cap for your health and stamina boost takes quite a while to hit, and once you get to what you want weapons-wise, you're pretty much set to go anyway. There are 2 things in any Souls game that everyone also has to talk about. One is the lore, which I won't touch on very much as I can't really do all of it justice, and the other is the boss battles. Massive demons, dragons, and monstrosities of every shape and size are all here, and on revisit, this is one of the more poorly aged parts of the game. Not to say there aren't good bosses here, there's a lot. It more comes with how rudimentary the enemy AI is. Look at a fight like Crossbreed Priscilla. She can do high damage to you if she hits you, but just by slightly repositioning before she swings, it's kind of a joke. Literally all I did was just rotate around and boom, fight's over. When the game's boss fights are like this, it can feel underwhelming. That said, when they're done right, it feels incredible. The two fights that I think best exemplify this are easily the Ornstein and Smough fight in the base game, called ONS by the community, and the Artorias fight in the DLC. Both of these fights offer that core decision-making that makes the combat in Dark Souls so engaging, and they do it in drastically different ways. In the case of ONS, you're given your first double fight against two drastically different fighters. One that's big and slow but hits like a truck, and another that's agile and fast, and also hits like a truck. Probably not an original joke, but I'm making it anyway. Their behaviors and attack patterns are very different, and you have to manage both at the same time, which leads to a very chaotic dance as you try to keep yourself healthy while also still doing damage. And once you beat one boss, the other powers up and gets a full heal. If you want an easier time on this fight, summon Solaire to take some of the pressure off of you and focus down Ornstein. His powered up state is significantly harder than Smough, and he hits just as hard. Now, if you want a great challenge, Artorias of the Abyss might be my favorite fight in the whole game. He's in the DLC, so it's entirely optional to choose to fight him, but I really recommend it. Artorias is, I think, the perfect example of how Dark Souls is played. And I say this because it's the only time where a boss fight very much feels like you are fighting another player. What I mean is that Artorias is one of the only bosses in the game that behaves like a person. He has nearly all of your tools, light and heavy attacks, heavy armor, buffs that he can stack, and he can even roll. The only thing he doesn't have is a shield, so he can't block or parry you. But his health pool and defense are very high. Look at how little damage I do per hit. And I'm not sure if this is true, but I swear he's immune to status conditions. My weapon inflicts bleed, and I've seen it go off on one or two of the bosses, but never once on Artorias. The fight is long. My successful attempt at beating him was, I think, around 5 minutes or so. But I enjoyed it so much I didn't even care. There's one other thing about this fight that makes it unique, though. It's one of the very few boss fights you can't summon anybody for, assuming you're playing offline. At first, this might seem scary, but once you see how Artorias behaves, a funny thing starts to happen. Yeah, he towers over you. Yeah, he deals an absurd amount of damage, even more if he sets up his buff. But the more you watch him move, the more you realize, wait, I can do all of this too. It becomes a tense dance of dodging, blocking, picking the right moment to strike until... sweet victory.
Holy shit.
Artorias isn't just fun because you're fighting a big, scary boss. That's certainly part of it. He's fun because you're engaging with someone that is using the same tools you have access to, and you have to show your mastery of them. Besides maybe one or two bosses in future titles, I haven't had any experience quite like fighting Artorias. Now, not every boss is a winner. There are a handful of stinkers here, and in my replay for this video, there were far more bosses that I found very underwhelming. The most glaring example, and it's the one that everybody talks about, is the Bed of Chaos. It's not because the fight's hard. Her attacks are wildly slow and have a pretty limited range, so if you're careful, you can evade them. What makes it so bad is that it's secretly a platforming boss in an action RPG. And you as the player don't have any way of knowing that until you die. And I hope you don't have any souls on you that you were saving, because this fight will kill you. A lot. Everything you've heard from people saying that the Souls games are unfair, they're probably talking about this one fight alone. The floors don't fall away until you're about to run into the pit that's under them, and even if you do avoid them, if you're not paying attention, the boss will just throw you into them and kill you anyway. I have the benefit of remembering this fight, so for me, it wasn't that bad. But God help whoever decides to go into this fight totally blind. To win, you have to go to these two nodes on the right and left side of the boss and destroy them. It sounds easy enough, right? Well, all of the pits that I just mentioned are on both of those sides. And again, you won't see them until you're practically on top of them. Then, once both nodes are destroyed, you have to somehow make your way back to the center, fall into the middle pit that opens under your feet, slightly to the left, run up some branches, and then you kill the boss in a single hit. This is probably the only boss in the series that I outright despise. Going in blind, you're likely to die a handful of times simply due to cheap hits knocking you off into the holes, or running off yourself because you thought there was stable ground. And all of this for a boss that dies in a single hit. Other bosses I remember being much harder, conversely, ended up being much easier than I thought. And that's primarily due to the AI. Seath the Scaleless was a boss I struggled with for a very long time when I originally played the game, but here I can just bury my face into his legs and he won't even touch me. He has a slam attack, he just never used it. Another boss that was wildly easier than expected was the Four Kings, although I will admit I saved it for near the end of my playthrough just because of how much I had struggled with it in the past. In a way, this fight is similar to the Bed of Chaos in that it's not a particularly hard fight, it's just an absolute mess of information. The difference here, however, is that this is an actual fight. The idea behind the boss is it starts with just one of the mentioned Four Kings, but as it goes on, the others will spawn until you're fighting all four at once. But if you're quick enough, you can take one down before the next one spawns in. There's also an exploit here where if you keep attacking a king as it dies, you still do damage to the boss's overall health bar. So this 4 kings fight can very quickly go down to a 3 kings if you can get in your attacks quick enough. There's an astonishing number of examples like this, where you can exploit a fight, be it because of how the game was programmed, or you figured out how to manipulate the AI to your favor. See my Priscilla example from earlier, but other examples include the Asylum Demon and all of his reskins. There aren't enough to take me out of my enjoyment of the game, but they're glaring enough to really start to show Dark Souls' age. I had mentioned earlier that the lore is another very famous part of Dark Souls. Rather than have a very clear-cut story, nearly every game in the franchise sets up the initial premise and leaves the rest for you to discover on your own. It can be a lot of legwork to get more info. Talking to NPCs, finishing quest lines, reading item descriptions. It's storytelling done in the way of, here's what you need to know to get by, but if you're interested, there is more to discover here. And that is one of my favorite things across all of the games. I won't go too in-depth into it, since others have done a far better job than I could, and you should definitely go watch their content, but I will share how in-depth this goes by recounting the story of one boss we already talked about as best I can, and that's Artorias. During the Age of Fire, when Lord Gwyn was still at the helm, he had 4 knights, one of whom was Artorias. In recognition of his sheer might of will, Gwyn gave Artorias the Wolf Ring to better augment his strength with his already powerful greatsword. Artorias was one of the fiercest and most noble knights. So much so that he held a strong resentment for the Dark Wraiths, knights that served the Abyss and sought to bring about the Age of Dark. Artorias would hunt them regularly, traversing New Londo and wiping out as many as he could. While there, he learned of a new ability that would let him hunt the Dark Wraiths at the source, Abyss Walking. Thus, from then onwards, he was known as Artorias the Abyss Walker. In time, another abyss opened in Ulasil. Artorias and his faithful companion, a young wolf named Sif, were sent to clear it out and protect the kingdom. And what we are told is that he was successful. In the Abyss, Artorias heroically gave his shield to Sif to protect him from its dangers, and then sacrificed himself to save Princess Dusk from the source of the Abyss, a creature known as Manus. Only, that isn't true. And that's what the events of the DLC show. The legend of Artorias is a lie. He failed. When the player is pulled into the past by Manus and comes across Artorias, he's much more creature than man. He still hangs on to his mission and hunts anything from the abyss, so part of him is still in there, but he's different. More like a rabid animal. In his defeat, he can't escape to potentially hurt others. And should you surrender his soul to Syrian, he's laid to rest with his honor preserved. Later, as you keep playing through the DLC, you're drawn to and save a young wolf, Sif. And later, in the base game, should you beat Manus before continuing to fight the Four Kings, when you find Sif to get the Covenant of Artorias so you can traverse the Abyss, Sif remembers you. And what's heartbreaking about the story is two parts. He does not want to fight you, and it is a required fight to finish the game. There's a lot more that I know I missed. Up until very recently, with the third game in the series, each Dark Souls game was relatively unconnected with one another in terms of their specific lore. But in Dark Souls 3, more context was given to the story of Artorias and the Abyss. If you want to know more about it, the Prepare to Cry video by VatiVidya is a great place to start that delves into the story. I know very little of the lore importance as I haven't finished Dark Souls 3 or any of its DLC, but that video does a great job of explaining it. And it's important to note that this is mostly a side story. A lot of the greater lore in Dark Souls is like this. Well-written, tragic tales of this world that's falling apart around you, and none of it is directly laid out for you. It's something you have to piece together yourself, and I feel it makes the experience all the more enriching. I've spent all this time talking about the story of the world of Dark Souls, but I still haven't touched on how it looks. I said it earlier, but each of the zones blends together seamlessly. Going through the ruined undead parish, seeing it progressively taken over by more moss and trees growing just off of the map, then descending down out of it into the Darkroot Forest just feels so seamless to me. Every area blends perfectly into one another. Trudging through the depths, and then going down into Blighttown. Fun fact that I actually learned recently, the water from the fight against the Gaping Dragon, that is the poisonous water that is in Blighttown. It is literally the sewage that is dropped down from the depths into this swamp, which I honestly think is really neat. Dark Souls just does such a good fucking job at, combining everything together. My dog is coming to say hello. We're exploring the claustrophobic catacombs to the very suddenly all too open Tomb of Giants, and eventually... Okay, nope, I can't do this. I need to get this off my chest. While the overall world design and the feel of each place is great in Dark Souls, I do not vibe with some of the zones nearly as much as I thought I did. Some have improved immensely, and I made that joke earlier in the edit about Blighttown, but it's honestly not that bad in the remaster. I was very surprised to see that after having not touched the game in so long. But it is a very infamous area because of how it runs on older hardware. Seriously, looking at it now feels like this was just playing a game on MS Office slideshow. When the game was finally brought to PC with the Prepare to Die edition, someone developed a mod to fix nearly every issue in the game, including how poorly optimized Blighttown was. Now, it's slightly annoying, but nothing you can't get through, and I think it still looks really good. Tomb of the Giants, on the other hand, is pure bullshit. Hey folks, quick addendum. I'm only realizing now that what I'm about to say involving navigating the Tomb of Giants is untrue, actually. There is one other item that you can get that projects light that doesn't take a weapon slot. You have to get the bad ending for Solaire's quest, but I'm a dumbass, and I didn't do that. I did not get this item. There's a unique helmet that he will give you after you get the bad ending that gives you a mote of light on your head, effectively. And that will illuminate your way through the Tomb of Giants, which is very helpful. That being said, a lot of my criticisms still stand. So I'm just making the note here so no one tries to pull a gotcha, but I just want to make it known that what I am about to say about the skull lantern is mostly untrue. It is the pitch black the whole way through, so you can't see at all. What you're meant to do is use an item called the skull lantern to project some light so that you can see. The only problem is, no matter what, it's going to use one of your weapon slots, probably your shield, because you don't want to go in here without a weapon. And the skull lantern does nothing else. It just projects light in this one area, and then you never use it again. But it wouldn't be that bad if the enemies weren't wildly powerful, right? Right? Pretty consistently, almost every enemy I fought here could kill me in about 2 to 3 hits. You might be thinking, just dodge, use those iframes. Except the pathway is narrow as fuck, so if you dodge, you potentially just yeet yourself off of a cliff and then die. And the only bonfire here is right at the start of the goddamn Tomb of Motherfucking Giants. There is another one you can find, but it's at the very end of the section. And even then, unless you are really committed to grinding for items, once you beat Nito, you do not have a reason to come back. Okay. I got it out of my system. We're past the tomb. I don't have to talk about it anymore. We're okay. This isn't the only place I have issues with either. Lost Izalith, while not as bad or rage-inducing in my opinion, just feels kind of unfinished. Scattered throughout a vast field of lava and roots are enemies that I can only describe as the butts of a dinosaur, and I'm not entirely sure why they're like this. It feels like there should be something more to them, but they're just legs and a tail that attack by leaping up and sitting on you. There's also not very many enemies here. The dino butts are there, but only until you reach the proper temple area. After that, it's just some fire-breathing statues and a strange yellow octopus thing that I admittedly want a plush of. Then, by the time you see it, bing bang boom, you're at the worst boss fight. All of this being said, though, there are still a lot of areas in Dark Souls that I love, and I remember so explicitly just getting lost and enraptured in every time. I still love exploring the Darkroot Basin, which now, all these years later, I'm only just putting together is the Kingdom of Ulasil from the past. I still get a kick out of exploring the Duke's Archive, even if I'm not that huge on the Invisible Pathway, which I'm only, luckily, just remembering is just run straight and you're fine, most of the time. The lower Undead Burg and the Undead Parish are so haunting in a way that I can only describe as beautiful. There's something about seeing the people still here, still fighting in their town, the guard that have all been hollowed. And the Undead Parish just feels so majestic to be in and is so much fun to just root around in and explore. And how could anybody talk about the world design of Dark Souls without bringing up Anor Londo? This place is a fan favorite for a reason. Everything goes from just grimy, muddy, and disgusting looking tile to suddenly bright and vibrant color. And even then, there's still that wildly unnerving quality to it. You get here and it looks immaculate, it looks amazing, but something still feels wrong. Something does not feel right. And it's that unease that is so incredible, and that atmosphere that I think Dark Souls does insanely well. One of the last things that I want to touch on is the final boss. So let's talk about Lord Gwyn. For aesthetics, I adore this fight. Nothing, and I mean nothing, hits that feeling of finality than entering the Kiln of the First Flame, killing the various Black Knights here, and passing through the Fog Gate. Gwyn, with a massive blazing sword in hand, turns to face you. You charge at each other, leap into battle. This is it. The end. This is what you fought for. And there's only one thing about this that bothers me just a little bit, and it's a shield-shaped issue on your left arm. Gwyn can be parried. There is only one boss in all of Dark Souls 1 that can be parried, and it's the last one. Not only that, counterattacks absolutely destroy him. Originally, this section of the video was going to be a lot more of a negative look at Gwyn, simply because he is the only boss that you can parry. And I will admit, on a gameplay level, I'm still not that huge of a fan of it. But when it comes to the lore and the story of it, it's something that I appreciate so much more. A quick shout out to Gingy and their video series on the entire Dark Souls franchise. It was their video on the first game that got me more open-minded about Gwyn, Lord of the Parry. While I still am kind of bothered by the idea that Gwyn is the only parryable fight, this is purely from a mechanical standpoint. From the lore, again, as expressed in Gingy's video, it makes perfect sense why Gwyn is able to be parried. He's gone hollow. He's a frail, decrepit zombie raisin man that just happens to have fire. The man has been on fire for thousands and thousands of years. I was originally going to say you should not fight Gwyn by parrying him. That by doing that, it is a kneecap to the core mechanics of Dark Souls and kind of takes away any form of challenge. But on the other hand, I don't think that's really the solution. I feel like that's more of giving yourself a handicap just so you can have a slightly harder fight. And I don't think that's fair. I don't think you should artificially make the game harder for yourself. That being said though, when he does come at you with the attacks that you can't parry, which are a lot of them, pretty much every magical attack, every grapple he has, you cannot parry. You find yourself back in that loop that Dark Souls wants you to be in, reaching into every toolkit, analyzing the fight and attack patterns. It reaches almost that fighting game flow state like I had mentioned earlier, and it is really something special. There's nothing else that I have experienced like this. I also completely failed to mention, Gwyn's music is some of the most beautiful moments in this game. Every boss fight has this big, loud, bombastic boss theme, except for Priscilla and maybe the Moonlight Butterfly. Gwyn gets this somber piano piece that sounds just like a man is ready to die. He is ready for the end and wants it to be over. And all that's left to do is for you two to just come at each other. Even with my grievances about being able to parry a boss, which is something that comes up way later in the franchise as well, I still think this is another one of the best boss fights in the game. The music, the sense of finality, the atmosphere, the moveset that Gwyn has, and how much he makes you fight for it, even when you can parry him. There's nothing else like it when you finally beat him and realize you're at the end of your journey. This entire section about Gwyn, for the most part, has been unscripted. Looking through what I wrote and watching people beat Gwyn for the first time, or any other footage of people playing the game and fighting him over and over again, and I can't bring myself to say what I wrote. Not because, oh, I don't believe it. Like I said, part of me still doesn't really like that he can be parried, but it doesn't feel honest. Looking through what I wrote, it doesn't feel genuine. It's not how I feel. It looks like someone trying to meticulously find something bad about a game that they like. And I mean, if the whole last moment of Tomb of the Giants hasn't shown you, there are still plenty of things about this game that I'm not a fan of. But even if I have a gripe or two with this fight, I still love it. I can't bring myself to say anything about it. This fight thematically at the end of your journey feels so good. And even if you die, you know that it can't stop you because you've died plenty of times before at this point. And here you are at the end. It's still possible to move forward. It's still possible to get that victory. And then you do. But now for the culmination of the journey, the ending. This is where I will talk the most about the general lore of Dark Souls, because it's kind of important to make an informed decision with the ending. There are two options before you once you finish the fight with Gwyn. Sacrifice yourself to set the first flame alight again and continue the Age of Fire, or leave and let the flame die, bringing about the Age of Dark. When I was younger and thought everything was more black and white, I would always link the fire. I mean, with a name like Age of Dark, that second ending sounds real bad. Plus, look at all the neat things that are in Inner Londo. This amazing architecture, healing miracles, this giant painting that takes you to a place that was originally going to be cut from the game. But is that really the case? If you look deeper at what Gwyn has done for the sake of the first flame, or in his name, to keep his control, it gets pretty hard to justify continuing that legacy. Take the New Londo ruins. When men began to attain power, they formed in order to challenge Gwyn and the Lords of the First Flame. These were the Dark Wraiths, channeling the power of the Dark Soul. The four kings, who were loyal to Gwyn, turned once they realized the power they had. So in order to stop this, Gwyn did the most calm and rational thing he could. He literally killed every single person in New Londo. All of the water that's in the area when you arrive, that was Gwyn. Then there's Ulasil, an entire city that he effectively gaslit into benefiting only him. Finally, there's the Ringed City in Dark Souls 3, an entire city that Gwyn built as a gift to man. That's gift in the largest air quotes imaginable, by the way. It was a prison meant to keep humans in line and act in a way that only favors and benefits the Lords of Cinder. Gwyn has slaughtered hundreds of thousands of people, all in the name of maintaining his grip on the world. So you can choose to let the flame die. You can kill Gwyn and just leave. Doing this, the Age of Dark begins, the Age of Men. And as you can see by the footage, this is the ending I chose. And with that, my journey with Dark Souls is over. So with that on what's probably not my final playthrough, what are my final thoughts? Yeah, there's no question, I still adore this game. Look, I know I spent the last...
Jesus fuck, how long?
Talking about mixed bags or things in the game that aren't great, and I won't lie, Dark Souls has aged. The game is over 10 years old, and it sometimes feels like it. But when everything is going the way as intended, there is still nothing else like it. The boss fights that work really work, and the greater lore, should you choose to invest yourself in it, is incredible. It is a janky mess sometimes, but when Dark Souls has worked its magic on you, that mess becomes something really special. It's the foundation of a greater series and a more refined version of what had come before. And then, FromSoft refined it again, and again, and again. Amidst all the jank and age, Dark Souls still has a lot of magic and value to give those that take the plunge into this dark world. Jesus fucking Christ, did I really end this in a pun?